Hey everyone, this is my 50cc 4-stroke motorized bicycle build. The bicycle is an early 2000s hardtail mountain bike with a chromoly frame. Today I'm going to tell you about my experience with this 4-stroke kit, why I bought it, some of the challenges and drawbacks I've encountered, and discuss the advantages and disadvantages of this 4-stroke kit as opposed to a 2-stroke or even electric kit. So what was I looking for going into this? I know what you're thinking, electric. Why not electric? Well, to put it short, been there, done that. I've had over a dozen e-bikes and scooters. I will talk more about why not later in the video, as well as the pros and cons, so stay tuned for that. Mostly, I was looking for novelty. Some cheap and fun power. I really liked the sound of the 4-stroke single-cylinder engine. Just something to run around town, grab groceries, go to the park, etc. Something I was not really interested in was doing non-essential performance mods, so things like intake, exhaust, carburetor, all of the things that the 2-stroke motorized bicycle community is all about. Let's go over some of the drawbacks and challenges I encountered going through this 4-stroke build. Here's the bottom line. These kits require tinkering, and for you to be mechanically inclined. You need to be prepared to do some work to get these kits to work right for your bicycle, and to continuously tune and tinker to get it working just right. Here are some of the challenges I encountered so far in rough chronological order. The first and biggest problem I encountered was a great difficulty mounting the 4-stroke engine in a bicycle frame. I went through 4 different bicycles trying to find one that worked. First, I tried a size medium, a 17-inch Huffy mountain bike, but the engine didn't even clear, not even the valve cover would fit, so that was a complete non-starter. Next, I went out and bought a size large, a 19-inch Diamondback commuter, and it was still slightly too small, but it may have worked if I had cut the choke lever. I wanted to avoid doing that, however, so instead I went out and bought a size extra large, a 21-inch Cannondale mountain bike. And in this case, the engine did fit, but the tubing on the down tube was too thick in order to accommodate the front engine mount. And so I had to use this compromise with a piece of brake cable, and it just wasn't secure at all. So finally, I decided to sell that bike and go with a size extra large 20.5-inch giant mountain bike from the early 2000s. And this one did actually work perfectly and is probably what was intended for these bicycle kits. The tubing was thin enough, being chromoly, that it was able to accommodate both front and rear engine mounts, and so the fitment was very secure. So if I could go back, I would highly recommend you immediately go towards a late 90s or early 2000s chromoly or other skinny tubing hardtail mountain bike. Even a full rigid might work, but I do recommend a hardtail. Size large or XL with a flat top tube, just like this. This will give you the best chance to allow the engine to fit and also to accommodate the engine mounts. Another challenge I had was a tank evap leak. Do you see this plastic bag and rubber bands on my gas cap? I would keep this thing in my garage, and without the bag and the rubber bands, I could smell a pretty strong gas vapor smell whenever I went into the garage. It was pretty clear that this gas cap wasn't sealing nearly good enough and letting lots of gas evaporate from the tank. Not good. Obviously, it's not expected to be airtight because it's gravity fed, but I did need to reduce the fuel vapors for safety. And so this was my solution. It works well enough, and now there's no more major gas evap leaks. So definitely a smaller problem, but something to consider. The next challenge I encountered was the stock chain tensioner. The chain tensioner that comes on all the motorized bicycle kits is pretty meh. They only attach to the bike at one point in the frame, so they can never really be aligned with the chain perfectly, and they can shift out of alignment. I've heard the horror stories of them shifting enough out of alignment to run into the spokes of your wheel, causing a huge wreck. Really not a fun experience. For me, I've had problems with chain retention because the stock chain tensioner allows no side-to-side adjustment. The chain just kept derailing and I could never get anywhere. So I bought an aftermarket chain tensioner, which is slightly better than the stock one. This improved alignment, and now I don't have any problems with chain retention. For the 2-stroke kits, they make an even better one because it's spring-loaded, but to my knowledge they don't make one for the 4-stroke kits, so this one had to do. Another problem I encountered was an exhaust leak. My particular kit was missing the exhaust gasket, and they had not welded the exhaust right. It caused an exhaust leak and excessive noise. I needed to grind flat the exhaust flange, buy exhaust gaskets online, and ultimately just use RTV exhaust gasket maker. Even now it's still not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. Another problem I had was the fuel line started leaking. It's generally known that these fuel lines are basically junk. They become hard and crack in a matter of months. And for me, in about 1 or 2 months, mine started to leak, so I had to run to AutoZone to get new ones. Also, the inline fuel filter cracked at the seam, so I had to buy a better one. Yet another challenge is the valve clearance. My valves went out of spec within 5 engine hours, which is actually crazy. Could just be because it's new, but the Honda official service manual says you'll only need to check and adjust the valves every 200 engine hours. And so the reason I had to adjust the valves was because after a while I had a really hard time starting. It would take 10 or more pulls and occasional kickback. And note, it was not the flywheel key. I checked and replaced it, and it was a whole pain all on its own. But yeah, a little disappointing that the valves went out so quickly. So the last of the major problems is the stock gearing, and this is more of a quality of life issue than anything. The stock gearing on these 4-stroke kits is way too short in my opinion. It comes with a 44-tooth rear sprocket. In my opinion, the top speed is not high enough with this. You get a lot of torque, but you can easily rev out this engine. This clone engine, which is a Huasheng 142F 49cc, or 144F, a slightly bored out version 53cc, is rated for about 7,000 RPM. But the Honda GXH50 it's cloning is rated to 8,000 RPM. So with that in mind, I find myself always revving out this engine to 8,500 RPM or more, and that's just at 25 miles an hour. It's just not fast enough with the stock gearing in my opinion. I was hoping to have enough speed to join a slow minor road like a 35 mile per hour, but with a 25 mile per hour top speed there's just absolutely no chance. Now for some people this gearing is totally fine, and they wouldn't want to go any faster anyway. But for me, I highly recommend about a 36-tooth sprocket, so if you do the math you can expect about 31 miles per hour top speed with this over the stock 44-tooth sprocket. I worry with any smaller of a sprocket you'll run out of power before reaching top speed, so I think about 36-tooth is about right. Lastly, some other common upgrades that people do, and some of which I have taken. First is an inductive tachometer. I like to monitor my engine RPM, and an inductive tachometer is a really cheap way to measure the engine RPM roughly. Basically, it just wraps around your spark plug wire and senses whenever the sparks happen. And so that's how it works. Second is the governor plate delete. This engine does not have a proper governor, instead it has basically this limiting plate that prevents you from opening up the throttle all the way. So I recommend you do take it off because it does limit your throttle to about 50 or 60%. It just unlocks some extra power you already had. And lastly, something that I'm planning on doing is putting a bigger carburetor on. With the stock governor plate, it does not really matter. The stock carburetor does good enough. But once you open it up from 70 to 100%, it does feel like you're running out of power. So a bigger carburetor is known to really help these engines breathe. So now the question arises, why a 4-stroke instead of a 2-stroke? When you think of a motorized bicycle, a lot of people see these kits. These are 2-stroke kits and they sound like this. These kits are super cheap, running about $100 as opposed to the 4-stroke kits which run more like $190 to $200. They're a lot smaller and much easier to mount in basically any frame. You wouldn't have the same problems I did trying to find a bike that would work. And also being a 2-stroke, they make more power for the displacement. Because they make a power stroke every other stroke instead of every 4th stroke, they make more power. Not to mention they usually come in higher displacement compared to the 4-stroke kits, often 66 or 80cc as opposed to 49 or 53cc on the 4-strokes. They quote in the range of 2.5 to 3 horsepower, while the 4-stroke kits are more like 2 horsepower. Lastly, the 2-stroke platform is known to have very good aftermarket modding and tuning community. There's lots of performance mods and parts available if that's your cup of tea. So with all of these upsides for the 2-stroke kits, why would I go with the 4-stroke instead? Well, a few reasons. The biggest for me boils down to ease of use and noise. For ease of use, there's many reasons why this kit is a lot easier to use. For one, I don't need to mix 2-stroke oil and gas. I can pull up to my local gas station a block down, fill up half a gallon and be good for another 60 miles. I don't need to bring a jerry can every time. Second, these things come with a pull start. 2-stroke kits require a bump start every time. In other words, you need to pedal up to speed and then dump the clutch to start the engine. It's just a hassle I don't want to have to deal with. And lastly, for quality of life, these come with a centrifugal clutch. The 2-stroke kits have a manual clutch lever, which you need to finesse yourself. Some like it better that way, but I've come to enjoy the ease of use of twist and go, just like a moped. Not as smooth from a stop, but plenty smooth if you pedal a little and then open up the throttle. Now the second major reason was noise. I know what you're thinking and rushing down to the comments to type.
Why are you even worried about noise if you're buying a gas engine? They make noise. Just get electric, you nerd.
And that's fair, and I'll go over why I bought this kit instead of electric in a bit. But living in a suburban neighborhood, I want to minimize noise as much as possible. There's no getting around it. These 4-stroke kits are a good 5 to 10 decibels quieter than the 2-strokes at idle and peak RPM. That's significantly quieter, and translates to about half the perceived volume. Some other benefits of the 4-stroke is that it doesn't come with the 2-stroke smoke. These engines are very clean burning. Also, from what I heard, they're a lot smoother with less vibration, especially at peak RPM. And lastly, I've heard these engines have less of a concern of overheating. The two-stroke kits, especially up a long, sustained climb, tend to overheat. And I've never heard of a four-stroke kit overheating. Of course it's possible, but as long as you're moving, these engines run very cool. Alright, and now on to the main question. Why get a gas kit when electric kits are so good? And yeah, if you were looking for an easy way to add power to a bicycle, electric is perfect for 90% of people. It's a super easy install, all plug and play. You literally plug in the motor phase, the hall sensor wires, a throttle, display, and battery into the controller, mount everything, and you're all done. Ends up being a much cleaner install. But for a gas kit, you need to mount the motor, install the exhaust, install the sprocket, size the chain, install the chain tensioner, drill into the handlebars to install the throttle, install the tank, install the fuel lines and fuel filter, then you still need to do tuning. Not to mention that electric is so much easier to maintain. Pretty much no maintenance task to do. Super robust and reliable. As I mentioned earlier, I've already had to do things like adjust valves, do oil changes, and change parts whenever they inevitably break. And to be honest, there's really very little practical reason to get one of these gas engine kits for your bicycle. It doesn't really make much sense from a utility standpoint compared to electric, but something you can never really match is the novelty and the sound. A lot of people really like the sound of a combustion engine and refuse to go electric because of it. This is probably the biggest reason why I decided to buy one of these kits. Some other benefits, they're cheaper. Even the more expensive 4-stroke kits run about $200. You'd probably spend that much just on a battery if you're going electric. And you'd still need to spend another $200 or $300 for the controller kit and motor. And if you go with the 2-stroke kit, you'd get a full kit for like $100. Also, these kits get really good range, or at very least competitive with the electric counterparts. A typical electric kit will have around a 10 amp hour battery, which is good for 20 to 25 miles of range depending on your power usage. But even these tiny half-gallon tanks can do 60 miles. And I've seen people put 1-gallon tanks of these for hundreds of miles of range. And don't think that I hate electric or something. Quite the opposite, actually. I've had over a dozen, probably close to 25 electric bikes and scooters over the years, and they're a lot of fun. Here's just a few of them. But something like this was a really fun and great project. And while they don't make much sense over electric if you're trying to use it for any sort of practical purpose, they are a lot of fun to build and ride. So there you have it, my experiences with the 4-stroke motorized bicycle kit. They're not super practical, but they're a lot of fun. Alright, see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Nope. Nope.